Hello and welcome you all watching In Your Interest here on News 9. I am Krishna Kumar. First up, a quick check of all our headlines. 13 dead, several injured in a blast at a fireworks unit in Kerala's Thrissur. Ahead of the Puram festival, Prime Minister Modi announces 2 lakh rupee ex gratia for the kin and 50,000 rupees for those injured. MK Stalin's last attempt to woo Tamil Nadu's voters urges the public to think and vote on the 23rd of April, says support the secular progressive alliance to shape the state's future. The Supreme Court of India questions the denial of devotees' right to touch the deity in the Sabarimala case, asks if the constitution will protect the believer barred from idol access. US President Donald Trump says great deal coming with Iran, rules out ceasefire extension, says the US in strong negotiating position. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu slams Iran, says military action prevented Iranian-wrought second Holocaust, claims strike averted existential nuclear threat. On this edition of In Your Interest, we put the spotlight on a date that has fundamentally changed the geography of South Asian security. Just a year ago, on the 22nd of April 2025, what happened in the quiet, remote meadows of Baisaran Valley was not just another terror attack, it was the catalyst for a total overhaul of India's national security architecture. A year ago, tourists walked into a meadow in Kashmir. They were on a holiday. Some were families. Some were on their honeymoon. 26 people were killed in Baisaran Valley near Pahalgam on the 22nd of April 2025. It was the deadliest attack on Indian civilians since the Mumbai terror strikes of the year 2008. And in the 12 months since that afternoon, India has not been the same country. The group behind it, the Resistance Front, is a shadow outfit of the Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba, or LET. India called it what it was. Not just a terror attack, an act of war. Within 24 hours, the Indus Waters Treaty, a 60-year-old agreement that had survived 3 wars, was put in abeyance. Pakistan's military attaches were expelled. The Atari border was sealed. The Pakistani nationals were told to leave. India activated what strategists call the DIME framework: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, DIME, pressure, all at once. Then came the 7th of May. In 23 minutes, Indian air and missile strikes hit more than 9 terror camps inside Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, including targets in Bahawalpur and Muridke, deep inside Pakistani territory. Operation Sindoor was not a surgical strike in the old sense. It was a statement. India did not just hit the terrorists. It hit the infrastructure. It hit the network. And when Pakistan escalated, India hit air bases. Pakistan asked for a ceasefire on the 10th of May. For decades, India's response to cross-border terror followed a predictable pattern. Collect evidence, issue démarches, approach the international community, and wait. That pattern is now gone. What replaced it is a doctrine that says a terror attack backed by a state will be treated as an act of war by that state. The perpetrators and the people in uniform who train and fund them are now one and the same in India's strategic calculus. The nuclear dimension is important here. Pakistan's deterrence argument that any Indian military action risks nuclear escalation was the invisible ceiling that constrained every Indian response for 30 years. Operation Sindoor tested that ceiling. India struck Pakistani air bases. The escalation did not go nuclear. That changes the equation, possibly permanently. India also demonstrated something else. The strikes were tri-service, Army, Navy and Air Force operating together. Indigenous platforms and imported systems worked alongside each other. The procurement pipeline, which was historically moved at a bureaucratic crawl, was fast-tracked. The shift from large-scale ground mobilization to precision standoff strikes was deliberate and it worked. India's new doctrine has a name now, proactive deterrence. The old one was called strategic restraint. Strategic restraint is dead. So the big questions that we are asking: has Operation Sindoor actually restored deterrence? Or is Pakistan just waiting it out? Is India abandoning old rules to win modern grey zone conflicts? If Pakistan tests this new normal again, does India's political establishment have the will to go further than Operation Sindoor? We have Ambassador Bhaspati Mukherjee, former Indian diplomat, Air Vice Marshal P.K. Srivastava, Defense and Strategy expert, Patikrit Pain, Foreign Affairs expert, all joining us on the broadcast. Thank you, all of you, for taking time out to be with us here on News 9. Ambassador Bhaspati Mukherjee, I'm going to begin by asking you a straightforward question. This changes the very nature of diplomacy, especially the diplomatic relationship between India and Pakistan, because now action will be met by action. That's the new normal.
Actually, you summarized it so well that, that there is really nothing much I can add except to say the following: that it was high time that we replaced the earlier doctrine by proactive deterrence. What we need to do is to go one step further and to remove the restraint we have put on ourselves on the nuclear issue on no first use. Because Pakistan, from day one, said they don't agree on no first use. We said, to show that we are a mature nuclear nation, we believe in no first use. But if you have a neighbor who believes that it can terrorize us through nuclear escalation, and whose generals actually have the finger on the nuclear button and not the civilians, especially now with the field marshal, it is time that we added to this proactive deterrence by removing our no first use doctrine. Secondly, you asked a very valid question, Krishna. You said, if there is another attack, and I'm sure there will be, because I think the ceasefire, we should have continued for another 5 days and wiped out much more stuff than we did, because we agreed to the ceasefire, which the DGMO from Pakistan asked, our DGMO, but naturally Trump jumped in and said he got the ceasefire done. So the point here is that if there is a second incident, I can say with confidence that this government will definitely be highly combative in its response, because that's the only way to deal with a bully who uses nuclear to strut around like they're strutting around now, claiming such great mediation victories when they're a completely bankrupt nation. So I think that the people of India will demand that we strike back.
Fair enough. Stay with us. Air Vice Marshal P.K. Srivastava. Clearly, Ambassador Basudev Mukherjee doesn't, in a sense, believe that there's Operation Sindoor has actually restored deterrence. He's expecting another, attack, another. So, would you concur with that? Do you think Operation Sindoor has actually restored deterrence, or is Pakistan just waiting it out?
So, my good evening to all my co-panelists and to you. Let me say one thing: if the political doctrine changes, the military doctrine is a derivative of that. While we served, I served Indian Air Force, all the time we waited for the political doctrine to say, okay, go ahead and do the hot chase, which is well within the international rules and regulations if you're being attacked like this. So now you talked about 3 spectrum, Army, Navy, Air Force. No, there were 6 spectrum at play. There's a space spectrum, there's an information spectrum, there's electronic spectrum. And in today's war, unless you integrate all 6 spectrums, you cannot converge your force in a manner that you can really make enemy understand that this is a great strike on them. And that's why you saw that we succeeded. And there's another thing we can pat our back for, is that we succeeded with our own home-developed, home-designed, and home-produced systems like Akash, like BrahMos, and like the other assets like Akash Tir and IACCS, Integrated Air Command and Control System. Because unless you have all of them together, you actually cannot do the operations the way they were conducted, that you have separation of enemy air defenses first. We struck first just to say, okay, these are the guys who have done the heinous act, and we need to teach them a lesson. We struck. And if Pakistan had not responded, we wouldn't have struck again. And the second strike, when we struck back after they struck us, we wiped out there nearly 20-25% of the Air Force. The eyes in the sky were wiped out. Their, all drone capacity storage things were wiped out. Their command and control centers were wiped out. So it actually disabled the whole of Pakistani Air Force. It was not there to fight back. Therefore, they came out with the proposal that, okay, we call it a day. And I would say it was political maturity to undertake that. If you see in today's context, people start the war and they don't know when to stop it. Where is that end point? So the lesson learned for the international community is that when you go for strike, you use your military might against any one of your adversary, you ought to have some objectives. There has to be an objective, clear-cut objective. Okay. I'm referring to Iran war. There is nobody knows, the whole world doesn't know what is the objective. And the war carries on forever. Okay, since you interrupted, I'll wait for the next time. Okay.
I really want to understand in that sense, Pathikrit, do you think that Operation Sindoor did not have enough of objectives going into it, and then it should have been extended further?
No, I think Indian government was very, very clear about the end objective. Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
I think Indian government was very, very clear and categorical in terms of making sure that the end objective remains very, very, right in front of you. Because otherwise there are, examples. If you look at what happened on October 7, 2023, Israel started a war which is still continuing. Whether it is good or bad, that's something else. But as a country, when you are a $4 trillion economy, you have to feed 1.5 billion people. You just can't afford to get dragged into a limitless, endless war. So you have gone with a very, very specific mission in mind. Once that mission was accomplished to a considerable extent, you have you have made sure that it is done and you have withdrawn. Because I think, let's be very clear, there are countries in the world who would want India to get dragged into a limitless war, endless war, just like the Russians have got dragged into. So I think Indian government was very, very categorical. In fact, if you look at it, there can always be a debate as to whether we should have continued for another 3-4 days or not. But that is a never-ending debate. That is a decision that we civilians will have to leave it to the government of India and to the armed forces. If the government of India has taken a decision, it has been taken after taking into confidence the armed forces.
Okay.
Now, there are other aspects to it. Does it mean that there will be no more terror attacks? Well, two things. Number one, India has, altered the threshold of its counter-terror response mechanism. It has made it very clear that every time there are evidence of cross-border, connections to major terror attacks, this is the way we will hit you back, and we will hit you in way you cannot predict it, because the next hit will not be like the previous one. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that India would be trigger happy. There was a very, very unfortunate, devastating terror attack in Delhi. It did not lead to another Operation Sindoor, because there were elements who again were radicalized from abroad or across the border, but India ensured that you don't get into it time and again. So there are two aspects. You have to keep the pressure on Pakistan, number one. However, you need to also do two things: create a de-radicalization architecture within the country as well, because radicalization online is happening. They are also changing their modus operandi, the Pakistanis or somebody else.
Right.
Other important aspect is last mile policing. Even if you look at what happened in Pahalgam, the last mile policing thing, the first respondent is always the beat constable or the team. I am not saying that every unit will be capable of dealing with armed terrorists, but last mile policing is something we should be very, very careful about in terms of equipping them. However, overall, if we presume that Pakistan is not going to try another Pahalgam, I think that should not be our thought process, because Pakistan will create another Frankenstein like Tehrik-e-Taliban if they do not allow Lashkar-e-Toiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed to do another terror attack.
Okay.
They will then hit again on Pakistan itself. So you have to be prepared for the next terror attack. And I think the government of India, in the last 1 year, even while refining its counter-terror mechanism, has done a tremendous amount of work within the country in neutralizing a lot of cells. You look at what is happening in Northeast India, a lot of people have been arrested. So it's a work in progress, it's a continuous thing, but to presume that it's done deal, well, that's not so.
Okay, fair enough. Air Vice Marshal P.K. Srivastava, let me bring this back to you. Do you think that if Pakistan tests that normal again, if there is another attack, India's political establishment has the will to go further than Operation Sindoor?
Krishna, it all depends on the threshold and the kind of attack which has been mounted on you. So we understand the government is making difference. If somebody is instigating, inspiring, motivating our own people, Indians, and they are getting into radicalized mode and doing some kind of attack, or they're creating internal strife, it is taken differently than if Pakistan dares to send their forces inside, their people inside, like in Pahalgam, and they do this strike. So there is a differentiator here. And if we have radicalization process, then we should also de-radicalize. That process must also be put in place. And that is being put in place. As you rightly brought out, the threshold is there. But this threshold, if violated, the punitive action will be very strong and loud. And now, with the Iran war going on, US has granted legitimacy to everything. One doctrine I have learned through all this conflicts which are going all over the world, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, or Iran, US, Israel, or Gaza, that you ought to be a powerful, militarily powerful country. But we have some issues. We have 1.5 billion people to feed. We want them to prosper. We want them to live in peace. Peace will bring prosperity. So military has a role to play, but it has a role to play at chosen moments, at selected moments. You cannot go berserk and be trigger happy. That's not a great idea for a great country like ours.
Okay, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, where does that leave India today in terms of diplomacy between India and Pakistan? Because if the doctrine has changed, how does it change the playground for diplomats?
I agree with my co-panelist. It was Deng Xiaoping actually who said that China should first become a great economic power before it becomes a great political power. And that is exactly what my co-panelist is saying. And that is the priority of the government, which is development. On the other hand, if you have a neighbor who has violated a fundamental nuclear doctrine, which is that two nuclear weapon states don't go into conventional wars with each other. That was the deterrence which worked during the Cold War, because it was called MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction. And that doctrine worked very well in preventing World War III when the world was divided into two hostile nuclear blocs. But Pakistan, when Pahalgam, violated it, and since it is a totally unpredictable nation,
Right.
the military has control over the civilian government, it is very difficult to say when they will strike and how they will strike. But strike they will, because visceral enmity to India is what keeps the Pakistani state intact. And with Donald Trump violating international law and demonstrating that the only thing that keeps a nation state safe from Trump is a large and powerful nuclear arsenal. That's why he doesn't go after North Korea, but he's gone after Iran, a 5,000-year civilization. In which case, I would like to thank Atalji for having made us into a nuclear weapon state, because those nuclear weapons and our arsenal is what keeps us safe in an uncertain world where the global order as we know it has collapsed and the new order has not emerged. That is how Gramsci said when he was in Mussolini's cell. He said, when the old order collapses and the new order does not yet emerge, that is when the monsters emerge. I think that is a very good statement that Gramsci made alone in his cell when he was put there by Mussolini. Krishna.
Okay, fair enough. Pathikrit, the other question that we're asking tonight is also this, that, do you think India is currently abandoning some of these old set rules when it comes to dealing with modern grey zone conflicts like the one that we have across the border with Pakistan?
Well, we are not abandoning, but we have been disillusioned by the approach and the attitude of the powers that be of the world, especially the Western power structure and the Western countries. They have double standards when it comes to terrorism. On many occasions, India went to United Nations, asked United Nations to have a definition for terrorism. On many occasions, we have approached the Americans, but they have been absolutely hypocritical in their approach towards terrorism. On the contrary, instead of criticizing terrorism, they came out with the concept of good terrorists and bad terrorists. And I think if you see a fundamental change in India's approach towards dealing with terrorism, a lot of credit definitely goes to Modi government. But nevertheless, one big issue is this, that we have realized that we are alone in our fight for the country when it comes to dealing with terrorist activities, because Pakistan is literally a vassal state for many other major powerhouses. They will always keep Pakistan afloat. They will not allow Pakistan to sink. The country may keep on defaulting on payments, but IMF will keep on giving them money. One tranche was given by IMF in the middle of the Operation Sindoor. Please understand that. So you are alone in your fight against terrorism, and that you have to fight it out. These countries, most of them are fair with the French. For United States, war on terror, global war on terror was only against terrorists who attacked America. It had nothing to do with targeting Lashkar-e-Toiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed or any other terror organization, which were not inimical to America, but were inimical to India. If you see a slight change in the American approach or the Western approach, it's because in 2611, foreigners, unfortunately even foreigners, even some Americans also died in that. Otherwise, you don't see West being too upset if something like that happens elsewhere. If there is an attack somewhere in United States, it becomes a front page news in India. But if an attack in India happens, it becomes a 6-page bottom line corner news in American newspapers, and they will call it gunman. They won't even use the word terrorist. So it was our folly that for a long time we trusted them to fight for us. They will not. So I think it's not an abandonment by India. It is a realization that you are absolutely alone on your fight, because it's only when you fight that other will start respecting you. And that's what India has done. Back to you.
Okay. Air Vice Marshal P.K. Srivastava, a year after Pahalgam and Operation Sindoor, one thing is clear. As far as the systems and the platforms used by India's armed services are concerned, it's been a great stock taking of how far we've come, and also improving our own procurement pipeline.
Krishna, I have watched it myself. I must say, since the time of this government's arrival. And the first thing which was told that we must go indigenous. And that was put on accelerated paths. And what dividends you got during Op Sindoor was the outcome of that acceleration, which happened within public sector companies, which happened in private sector companies, and which made, I was party to the task forces where we pleaded with the government that we must raise the second arm of our industry, that is the private sector, to participate. Unless they participate, it will be one hand wonder, and which will not happen. So you have so many drone companies coming up, you have so many directed energy weapons systems coming up. So all these systems, when they fire, that means we are looking ahead. We are looking ahead into the future, the how we going to fight the future war. And one thing is very sure, which lesson we have learned, even whether it's Russia-Ukraine war, but it got even more pronounced during Iran and US-Israel war, that you have to fight on economic front too. You cannot be shooting down a drone of $50,000 with 14 million THAAD missile, because that's too much of economic damage. The war cost has to be kept in mind. I have to get each value for each of the rupee which I spend, and that can only be done if you are indigenous. Second thing, your interceptors, if they are not homegrown, somebody will put the foot on the oxygen pipeline. You may have the platform, but you have nothing to fire. Where are your missiles? Where are your interceptors? So that's a great challenge. Now we have capacities, we are building capacities, and those capacities are for the future. But I agree at this point of time, we must very selectively choose to engage in war, because there's a time to rise and rise economically. Be punitive, be very, very sharp and impacting, but be very, very selective, because you cannot lose the momentum and go on an attrition path of war. War doesn't, even US is not able to bear the cost of the war. Per day cost is coming out to $1 to $2 billion. And so far they have spent nearly $40 billion. And they're asking, Pentagon is asking for $200 billion more just to fight the Iran war. And their defense budget is $1.5 trillion. That's horrendous. And they're cutting on medical aids and medical insurance and all that. Is that the kind of country you want to run as a democracy? I don't know. At least we don't understand that. Military is there to support the democracy's establishment, and it runs well and does the good governance. It is not there to win other sovereign nations. That's our understanding in Indian Armed Forces.
Okay, Bhaskar Mukherjee, one last comment from you before we wrap things up. Tell us what does do you see, say, a few years down the line? We are a year down the line when it comes to Pahalgam. It's something that this nation will never ever forget. The biggest terror attack since the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, and that has fundamentally changed the way bilateral relations between India and Pakistan will move forward in the near future, isn't it?
Krishna, I was Joint Secretary Europe West when Kargil happened. If you compare how we handled Kargil and how we handled Pahalgam, it shows that the nation has come of age. And what my co-panelists have said about the Indian Armed Forces makes me so proud of my Indian Armed Forces. They are the best that India and any country could have. Our armed forces and our government have always worked together to ensure that India's development is not retarded, but at the same time, we are not regarded as a weak nation, that we pick and choose, and then when we hit so hard that we hope that if the enemy has any rationale behind his thinking, then the enemy would think 100 times before striking. So I would like to also say that I would like to pay tribute to the Poniwala who died in Pahalgam defending those who were killed because of their religion. He died because he was an Indian, and in India, that's the way we live, with our wonderful Indian people and our wonderful armed forces. And I'd like to thank my co-panelists for saying what he did. And thank you, Krishna. Your summing up was so brilliant that there was really nothing for your panelists to say. You said it all as far as I'm concerned.
Fair enough. We're completely out of time here in this conversation. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former Indian diplomat, always a pleasure and a privilege having you with us on the broadcast here on News9. Air Vice Marshal P.K. Srivastava, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on In Your Interest. And of course, as always, Patikit Pain, who's also always a pleasure to be discussing affairs with him. And with that, we take a very short breather. We'll be back with the other debate on the other side. Keep it with News9.
With AI-powered systems like the DSU AI Factory, threats can be detected and countered in real time, protecting lives. Artificial intelligence is transforming industry and shaping the future. Behind every breakthrough lies one essential force: compute power. Dayananda Sagar University, we are building a next generation